We welcome everybody to another installment of Ministers Joe and Josh Discuss. Let's move ourselves to Genesis chapter 26. There's a famine. And Isaac does what everybody in Israel does when there's a famine.
Mm-hmm.
What do?
Tempted to go down to Egypt.
Not just tempted, they go to Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a geographical reason that they do that. There's a river in Egypt that is not fed in Egypt. It's fed much further south in more forested regions in the hills of modern Ethiopia. And so the river is pretty resistant to droughts in the Middle East. That river always runs. So the Egyptians had a water source that was, in these days, very reliable. And that's the secret of their civilization. So if you live in the Middle East and you're in a drought, you could go north and hope that they got rain and you didn't. But it's always a better idea to go where there's a permanent river.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have the Jordan River, but that can dry up, especially in times of low rain. So they almost always go to Egypt. Abraham did it. Isaac is going to do it. Same thing is going to happen in the life of Jacob. And it's a temptation throughout the history of Israel. Go back to Egypt. So it happens here. He goes to Egypt. Why does he go to Egypt? Why does Isaac go?
Well, you just said there's a famine. So
there is a famine, but is it his idea? Does he go?
He doesn't go.
Yeah, see, he wants to go. Everybody wants to go.
Yeah.
But God says, don't go. So I've kind of set you up, Minister Joe. I was setting you up here.
Yeah, I was thinking of the Keith Green song, So You Want to Go Back to Egypt.
Yeah. Oh, I like Keith Green.
Where it's warm and secure.
So he wants to go to Egypt. Everybody wants to go to Egypt. But God tells him not to go to Egypt, and this is what we were just talking about.
Mm.
God says, go to, what does your Bible say?
Gerar.
Gerar. Why in the world in a famine would you go to Gerar? Do you see this place?
Yeah, doesn't look like any water there.
No, it's in the region of the drought. Like, he literally tells him to just go a few miles. So it's a very strange, I guess my point is it's a very strange command.
Yeah.
You're in the middle of a drought, you'd think you need to go further than Gerar. So there's something going on in the story that right at the beginning, we should be aware of. God is, I don't know, is he testing Isaac? What is going on?
Oh, must have been some water there somewhere.
Yeah. He's going to settle in a region that we are familiar with. This is the region of Abimelech. Now, Abraham never went to Abimelech's region during a famine. Like, there was not a famine that led him there. In fact, he ran into Abimelech because he settled in his area. So Abimelech apparently does not have quite the range in Isaac's day that he did in Abraham's day, because Abraham was settling at Beersheba and Abimelech interacted with him there. But now Abimelech is sort of retreated towards the coast into Gerar, and Isaac doesn't run into him until he moves a little closer to the coast. So we're just getting some indications of some geopolitical changes. We don't know what's going on in Abimelech's kingdom, but it looks to be smaller than it was. And I think that's an important detail that's going to come into the conflicts that come. And he might be retreating because of Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little sign that might be the case at the end. So I'm just kind of teasing out the details that might be important to recognize here at the beginning because of how the story goes. But God tells him to settle in Gerar.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the setup. I'm done dictating how the conversation goes. I just want to make sure we got those historical, geographical things out in place.
Right.
So now I'll hand things over to you, Minister Joe, and we'll go back and forth with what we see here. But now that we've got that kind of in place, how do you want to start with this? What begins to stand out to you as worth considering?
Yeah, well, we wrestle with the idea that it was kind of a replay of Abraham and Sarah with Abimelech, and we wonder what the purpose of the situation is, whether or not generationally people can learn from their parents.
Yeah, so before we get to that, because that happens in 6, I don't want to skip over the covenant, because there's a covenant renewal. God has already made his covenant with Abraham. He's already promised Abraham Isaac would be the heir of that covenant. But here we have the covenant renewed. Right? God basically says the same thing to Isaac as he did to Abraham, but with a few. We should notice if there are any differences. So, first of all, Abraham's covenant was just with Abraham. God makes it very clear in verse 3 that his covenant with Isaac is because of Abraham.
Right.
So, he doesn't say to Abraham, I'm making a covenant with you because I made a covenant with your father. That's not how it goes. But with Isaac, that's how it goes. And he tells him to settle in the land of Gerar, or at least in this region of the Negev. And he is going to be with him. He's going to bless him. He's going to give him all these lands. He's going to basically saying everything I said to Abraham, I'm now saying to you. Offspring as numerous as the stars. And he's going to give him all these lands. The nations of the earth shall gain blessing for themselves through your offspring. Now, that's a different way of saying it. It's similar to what he said to Abraham, but different. But verse 5. Why does God make this covenant with Isaac? On what foundation? Now, he's already said, because I promised Abraham, but he gives another reason.
Yeah, it says, Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commands, my statutes, and my laws.
Yeah, so these words are significant. So the laws are Torah, statute are hukah, and commandments are mitzvah. So these are the stock words for the law of Moses. So we don't have the law of Moses yet, but what it's indicating is Abraham did what I told him.
Yeah.
And he indicates that this covenant that he's making with Isaac is somehow dependent on Abraham's obedience, which is not surprising if you're reading the story, because that's kind of what he said to Abraham in chapter 22. Now that you've sacrificed your son, your only son. So that's why I'm bringing it up. Is God reminding Isaac that he's getting this covenant because Abraham was willing to sacrifice him?
Must have been a little painful.
I would think so, right? Because I can't imagine, there aren't too many stipulations that God gives to Abraham. The big one is the sacrifice of Isaac. And God indicates that the covenant he's making with Isaac is dependent on that incident on Mount Sinai. Mount Moriah. And you and I, we've talked about the fact that there's some evidence that Isaac was traumatized by that. You think it must have been hard for him to live into a blessing dependent on the worst thing that ever happened to him?
Yeah, I think it probably got his boots shaking, his knees are knocking.
Yeah.
What?
If you're reading all of Genesis, that's how this story goes. So you can understand Isaac is an interesting character. And he seems to be a less strong character than Abraham, but you can almost see why. So he settles in Gerar. And then the men ask about his wife.
Right.
So this is different than Abraham. Now, I hate to be quizzing you, but I don't want to do all the talking either. How is this different than Abraham?
Let's see here. Could be a little tighter here. All right. When the men the place asked him about his wife, he said, "She is my sister." He was afraid to say my wife, thinking, or else the men of this place might kill me for the sake of Rebecca, because she is attractive in appearance.
So here's what I'm getting at. Maybe you want to interact with this more than just be quizzed. So Abraham tells Sarah before they get there that she is to say she is his sister, because he anticipates problems. It looks like Isaac is a little more reactive. It looks like his decision is because the men inquired. and he seems to know why they're inquiring. He doesn't want to say she's his wife. He sees something. And so he lies and says she's his sister as a reaction to them, whereas Abraham planned ahead. You know,
Yeah.
Now I don't know why that difference is highlighted, but it's highlighted. I mean, it's right here. So Isaac makes the same decision Abraham does, but it's still, he makes it differently. Abraham thought, what if? Isaac knew. It happened. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you see a guy going, who's that? And he sees how they're looking at him, at her, and he's like, okay, I'm in trouble. Because if they want her, they're going to take me out. So it's a little different. Abraham anticipated that would happen, and maybe he did it because he had experience, because he's much older than Isaac at this point.
Right.
But it's interesting that Isaac, this is a defense. It's not anticipating, it's an actual defense. He's actually at risk.
Right.
And we don't know this culture, but he did. And today, if you're with somebody, if you're with your wife, and somebody gives her a look, most of us are not concerned, that guy's going to kill me.
Yeah.
But apparently that's a realistic fear in this world.
Yeah.
So just to build the scene correctly.
Yeah, it almost begs you to think that whether or not Abraham and Sarah ever talked about that. I mean, that would be the only way that he would know.
Yeah. Yeah, they must. He seems to know to do this. So I would imagine, I thought after Abraham's experience with Abimelech, he learned his lesson. He would never do this to Sarah again. But you kind of get a sense that he might have even taught his son.
Yeah. Yeah, which is kind of a weird defense mechanism. It's more like the lizard losing his tail when they grab a thing, or rather than the.
Yeah. And especially after the high praise we just had of Abraham, that he kept the commandments. But here, God has never made a commandment about this. And I think that's an important thing for us to remember. I said it in the sermon on Sunday, and I really think it's important. We become responsible once God tells us what is right and wrong. Now, we have a conscience, but the conscience is very squirrely, because his conscience will be conflicted here. His desire to protect his wife, maintain his marital vows, survive in a foreign land. There's a lot of complication there. So sometimes when you're in those situations, conscience leads you in many different directions. You don't know which one is quite the right one. Now, we always think, oh, I would know. I would never do what Isaac did. But you're not in that situation either. So it's important for us to remember that the patriarchs are not painted as pure, but they're obedient to what God tells them. But you're always aware in the story, there's a lot he didn't tell them yet. This will be addressed in the law of Moses later. Yeah. If Isaac lived under the law of Moses, this would have been bad news for him. But he doesn't. And that's why we keep saying, when the Lord tells you to do something, now you are responsible for it. Paul says, apart from law, sin is dead. But sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment, produced all kinds of wickedness in me. He says that in Romans 7, right? This is what we see. Isaac, apparently Abraham's whole family is unaware of the evilness of this so far, because they repeat it. But they're learning something about this, because in Abraham's case, what happened? Pharaoh was cursed. Abimelech was cursed. They had to repent of it, give his wife back. Abraham had to pray for Abimelech to lift the curses on his house. Yep. So they're learning that God doesn't like this. But they still are not learning what they should do. So we move on to the next part, which tells us what ends up happening. Isaac's there for a while. The king sees her just like he saw. I mean, he has something for Abraham's family, this king, if it's the same king, or if it's a son who's carried on the name. But we had talked last time that the names are all the same. So maybe this is the same king. Maybe he was really young when Abraham was old, and now he's old when Isaac is younger. Maybe that's it. Isaac was 40 when he got married, so it's still a ways into his life. But anyway, Abimelech called for Isaac Well, before Abimelech can do anything, something happens that's totally different than the Abraham story.
Oh yeah, he catches them in the act.
PDA.
Yeah, PDA.
Yeah, I don't know what fondling means, but it's
I'm
obviously
sure.
something that a brother and sister shouldn't be doing.
I'm sure he was just combing her, brushing her hair.
Yeah, whatever. But he sees it. So this is again different. She doesn't actually get taken in to his house,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't have the curses, right?
Right.
Now, how do you understand this? Do you think God got involved to make sure that Rebecca didn't get in, or do you think this is just happenstance?
Well, I think.
Or is it telling us something about Isaac?
Well, he actually, obviously had access to her to be able to do that. It's definitely revealing something about because it talked earlier about how Isaac loved Rebecca. Um, that's
Do you think he loved her more than Abraham loved Sarah? Because Abraham was convincing. He lived in the region in Egypt and nobody ever got the wiser. They thought they were brother and sister. Isaac couldn't pull it off.
yeah. I think Sarah and Abraham's relationship was strained at times.
Yeah.
Very.
And they were much older,
Yeah.
Yeah. But here's the kicker with this story. So Abimelech knows whose son this is. And Abimelech almost made the same mistake twice. And Abimelech remembers what happened the last time. How do I know? Because he says, "What is this you've done to us? One of my people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon all of us." How does he know? Because it happened before.
Well, the difference here too, though, if it's the same one, is that God spoke to him before.
Yeah.
Said, you're sinning here.
But Abimelech's learned, because in verse 11, he makes a new law in his land that anyone who touches Isaac's wife will be killed.
Yeah, seems like he's the only one learning here.
So do you see, I want to get into Abimelech's mind, because eventually Abimelech is going to want to make a covenant with Isaac. Do you see what happens here? Like, he's probably wondering, is this guy coming in to conquer me? Maybe he thinks this is Abraham's way of conquering. Like, make him take his wife in, and then his God will kill us.
Yeah, right.
What are
There
these
you
guys
go.
doing? Why didn't you tell me the truth? Your father already did this once, and we had all these curses. Now you're back. What do you want, my land? What's going on here? Like you can see the machinations. You've got to explain why Abimelech after this will go and want to make a covenant with Isaac. And I think part of it is he thinks Isaac is trying to conquer him. Why does God bring him into my town?
Right.
Why is he settling here? And now he's done something. I almost got us all killed again.
The enemy from within.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know how Abimelech is processing this, but he does not like that this is now happening a second time. And so he makes a law. It's a law for one person. So, it's important for us to realize that poor Abimelech is operating out of a history. How do you read this?
Well, like I said before, seems like he's the only guy learning anything here.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me. And I think it's really X is really trying to emphasize what the promise was to Isaac there.
Yeah.
About the nations actually blessing him through it.
That's really an insightful thing to say, because obviously he's cursing them again. Like they're not being blessed. It's quite the opposite. And that's the same thing that happened with Abraham. And it's very early on, right after God gives him the covenant, he goes to Egypt and curses Pharaoh by lying about Sarah. And Isaac does the same thing. He brings a curse. In both cases, though, they incidentally curse others because they're afraid for themselves. There's a sense in which selfishness or self-preservation is what leads them to become a curse. That's a theme in the scriptures.
Definitely. Lot's daughters, Cain and Abel.
And Jesus breaks that theme, but you could argue that God is trying to show how dangerous self-preservation can be. That instinct for self-preservation at all costs can be. You can see it all through the scriptures, but Jesus, of course, rejects it entirely by laying down his life for his enemies. Right? Entirely different than Isaac and Abraham's response. But this theme of self-preservation, later theologians like Augustine will say that the definition of sin is self-obsession, the self turned in on itself. Mm-hmm. And you can see where he gets it when you read the stories, because these people are supposed to be a blessing, but their fear of dying, their fear of being killed and suffering keeps them from being a blessing. Instead, they become a curse. And it happens now for the second time. And Abimelech, not happy.
Right. What is this you've done to us?
And if that weren't enough, now Isaac, it says, sowed seed in that land and reaped 100-fold. It's a famine. Do you remember?
Right.
It's a famine.
With no water.
Yeah. And so the Lord blesses him and he gets rich and he prospered until he became really wealthy. Now, we thought Abraham was wealthy, but now Isaac is wealthier still. Flocks and herds, a great household. So even the Philistines envied him. So now Abimelech's whole household is jealous of Isaac. And apparently they didn't much care for Abraham either, because we get this detail in verse 15 that they had filled in all the wells Abraham dug. And that seems to me like biting off your nose to spite your face.
Yeah, that's real anger.
But remember, they had made covenants about at least some of those wells, so they couldn't use them. So it's kind of the slash and burn. If I can't have them, no one will. Right? And they filled in the wells.
It must have took some effort, though, to fill them in.
Yeah, this is spiteful. They're trying to remove Abraham's claim to the land.
What wells? There's no wells here.
Yeah, well, I don't remember any wells. Do you remember any wells? Was there a well over there?
I didn't see any. Oh, well, it's gone.
What about that mound of dirt? Oh, it's always been there. My grandfather talked about that mound of dirt. I got a picture near that mound of dirt when I was 5. You know what I mean? It's just...
And we got the T-shirt for it.
So Abimelech says to Isaac, you got to go. You got to go. Yeah, like, he doesn't want to be that close to the blessing of God. Is that weird?
Where the lightning strikes.
Yeah, I don't know. Abimelech seems to have a sense that this is a threat to him. Do you think it's Isaac or Isaac's God? Or maybe the two can't be separated?
Definitely an answer to that promise. And sometimes when you have that kind of backdrop, you want less light on you.
Yeah, you know, why the people of darkness flee from the light is always an interesting conversation, because that's what's happening here. But you know, when Jesus comes, he says that the people flee from the light because they love the darkness. And I think that's true in Jesus' day. That's absolutely true to his context and exactly what's happening. But in this day, the flight from Isaac, it's difficult to say. I think it's partially self-preservation, which might mean exactly what Jesus means. You know, that they love the darkness. They want to survive, and the light will destroy the darkness. But Isaac has already almost brought curses on them, and that doesn't make them happy. And now he is being blessed beyond all measure, and the people of Abimelech's kingdom, they're jealous of Isaac. They're looking to Isaac. They're looking at the light. Mm-hmm. And he's like, this is a threat to me. So I need to get the light as far from me as possible. I got to get this person with this covenant, this relationship with God out of here. I need things to go back to normal. And that's what the light does. It destabilizes, right? Isaac's presence destabilizes this society. And this society wants to survive. It wants to stay as it is. And Isaac is a threat to that. They got to get him out. He almost killed us once, so he's dangerous to be around. And now he's wealthy, and everybody wants to be like him. We got to get this guy out of here. And so he asks him politely.
Yeah.
You're too powerful for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go away.
So Isaac goes away, but not very far. He goes to the valley of Gerar. I mean, it's right near the city. So he leaves the city and he lives in a suburb. It's like saying, get out of Syracuse. And they say, all right, we'll go to Camillus. You know?
Even though they call it the same, it's still the
right.
town of Camillus.
Yep. And he dug wells that Abraham had dug. And it's very clear what Isaac is doing. He's reestablishing his place in this land. And that's what Abimelech's afraid of. Right? So, and then they start fighting with the herders of Gerar. These are Abimelech's people, right? They quarrel with Isaac, claiming that the wells belong to them.
Mm-hmm.
We stopped them up, so they're ours.
Right,
sort of thing. That's our dirt you dug out of them.
Yeah.
So the water's ours. So Isaac starts naming these wells. Now, apparently, Abraham dug them all. But he starts naming them all. Esek, because of the contention. Sitnah, because they quarrel. And then, excuse me, then he digs another well, and they don't fight over it. He calls it Rehoboth, or Rehoboth, broad places, or room. The Lord's made room for us. So they're moving him, if you follow the geography, they're moving him further and further east, back towards Beersheba, where he had been before. So that's what they're doing. They're pushing him back. And Rehoboth, or Rehoboth, is about as far west as they are willing for him to come. They don't dispute that. But it's close to Beersheba, which is where he goes next. So then the Lord appears to him. So I'll let you respond to all that. I know I'm kind of narrating it through, but I want to get a sense of the dynamics.
It seems like there's a lot of similarity between Abraham, what he experienced in Egypt, and with Abimelech prior, and we can see the threat that Isaac has become to Abimelech, in the sense that if you're able to make crops grow in the desert or in a famine time, and then have animals and be able to, that shows power, but it also shows commerce. Supply and demand is going to drive us to the point where Isaac is. People are going to go to Isaac, and probably for Abimelech that was a threat, not only for supply and demand, but also power and control. And anytime you're a leader, you feel threatened that way. You're going to try to push away any of those competitions. So we can see why Abimelech would want him to leave.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense to get a guy like this out of your territory, because this guy's destabilizing, popular, and he's blessed. And now they tolerate Abraham, but Abraham's a sojourner, right? He's just a visitor in this land. They probably think, once he dies, we'll take care of his kids, and God's with him, but
right.
we'll make sure they don't give us too much trouble. But once Isaac is blessed and is doing even better than Abraham, it's pretty clear that these people are here to stay, and that God is with them, or at least their God is with them. Remember, Abimelech believes in many gods. So this is more than just territorial bickering. This is nation building.
Yeah, there's a good chance that if people that were under Abimelech's control saw Isaac as a rival or a prosperous, there's a good chance that they would want to follow along in his footsteps, follow his God, follow his methodology. So that would be a huge threat.
Yeah, we already found out that Ishmael, remember earlier in the story, is ranging around in this same area, around Beersheba, and then and he's gone a little further south, but that's Abraham's kids too. We already know that Abraham has these other children by this other concubine, and they've kind of gone east and they've started to take over. And now you got Isaac moving right into Abimelech's territory. I mean, God sent him right to Gerar. And so it feels like an invasion, and that's a threat.
Right. Now, one of the most valuable assets is water. I mean, water's like gasoline in their day. I mean, in our culture, no gas, no electricity, no cars, no small engines or anything like that.
Though in all fairness, water's still important.
Yeah, really important. Yeah. Oh, in our culture too, yeah. But I'm just saying, what they could care less about gas back then.
Right. No, but
But
you're right. Resources.
yeah.
Resources for life.
So the contention over water is huge because you can't have animals for very long without water.
Yeah.
So
Now we'll get a sense of how big Isaac is getting based on the delegation that Abimelech sends to him. So when Isaac settles here and they see kind of where his territory is, which in the days of Abraham used to be Abimelech's territory, by the way,
mhm,
and now it's becoming Isaac's territory. He's establishing himself. Abimelech goes out to him from Gerar with Ahuzat, his advisor, and Phicol, the commander of his army. We've heard of him before. So he brings out his military and his advisor and the king.
mhm,
This is clearly the kind of delegation that would come for treaty discussions, right?
Yeah, right.
And
Commander.
Isaac's response is, so why do you come here since you hate me and you sent me away?
That's right.
Yeah.
What do you want from me?
Yeah. So they say, well, we see that the Lord is with you. They seem to know the name of the God of Abraham. That's why Yahweh is used there. It's not a name that's been revealed yet, but the writer of Genesis, Moses, is trying to let us know they're talking about Abraham's God, not just any God. So let's make an oath. Let's make a covenant. Let's set down some parameters. I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, well, that's always a deal. Let's make a deal. It's just like the TV show. Let's make a deal. So we know that you've got all the flocks. You can grow crops in a famine, and we know you got the wells. Even though we put dirt on them, you redug them again. Let's talk about how we can make this work.
Yeah. And they come in the position of humility, which is interesting because Isaac is really, you would think, the weaker one. Abimelech's been here much longer and is an established ruler. And Isaac is just the second son of a man who just got there. It's been a while, but still, he's not been there a long time. But they seem to come almost as though they're the peacemakers. You would think the lesser would come to make a treaty with the stronger, but the reverse seems to be happening, and they're afraid of Isaac. I think that's clear enough here. So they say, we see the Lord's been with you. Let's make an oath that you won't harm us, just like we've not harmed you. We've not touched you. We've only done good to you. And when we sent you away, we did it in peace. We didn't chase you out. We didn't take anything. And now you're blessed. Mm-hmm. So let's just promise you won't hurt us. I mean, that's the covenant is, let's promise you won't hurt us.
Right.
It's not like, we won't hurt you. You won't hurt us. This is where your boundary is. This is where ours is. It's sort of a weird covenant. It's like, we just want you to promise that you won't hurt us.
Just be nice.
Yeah, they're afraid of him.
Yeah.
Which is such an interesting thing.
Yeah, because we don't hear anything about Isaac seeming like a real military threat. When you send your advisor and your commander of your army, it means it sounds like you have a well-ordered militia, shall we say.
Yep.
That's the impression. And it's like, whoa, Isaac's got the Secret Service going on.
God is already making a name for himself in this land, and the gods of Canaan, because remember, there are spiritual forces over these nations. They're already afraid of him. Like we could say Abimelech is just making a political decision, but it's an unusual one. It's one you wouldn't expect. If you're just thinking about human interactions, an established king with a large region should not be coming in fear to make a treaty of no harm with a shepherd who has recently been blessed, but is just really getting newly established. You wouldn't expect that. But there's more to it, because remember, God is with Isaac, and that's what he keeps saying. Yahweh is with Isaac. And Abimelech has a sense that whatever God he's worshiping is not going to compete with this God.
Mm-hmm.
So he comes in a position of submission, even though from a human, materialistic, geopolitical stance, you'd think that's ridiculous. Make Isaac come to you. You're the one who's been here. You've got how many cities? This guy's got a few wells.
Right.
But he's afraid.
Yeah.
And you might say that in the worldview of Genesis, the spiritual rulers of this region are afraid of Yahweh, and thereby their subordinates are afraid of Isaac.
Yeah.
Like there's something going on here. And so they come on their knees. They know that this is not a God to mess with.
Right. Yeah, and it's stark contrast for them. I mean, Isaac says, "Why are you coming to me? You sent me away."
Yeah.
So
Isaac makes them a feast. They eat and drink. In the morning they get up, so they stay overnight. So he's hospitable to them. This is just like Abraham seemed to be. They exchange their oaths. We're not told what oaths Isaac makes. And I think that's important. I think the emphasis of Genesis is on the fact that Abimelech is making oaths. But Isaac might have made some. He sends them on their way, departs in peace. And that same day, they find water. A new well.
We found it.
And this is a major well. This is a well. I don't know if it's still there today. I don't know, but it's still there in the days of Jesus. He names it Beersheba. Well, he calls it Sheba. But the city is Beersheba to this day.
Mm. Which literally means we found water.
Means well of the oath.
Well of the oath.
Well of the oath, because they found a well right where they made the agreement. Shiva looks like oath. It resembles the word for oath. Yeah. Beersheba is, yeah, the location of the well of the oath. It also could mean seven, because Shiva means seven in Hebrew. But it seems to mean oath here. Yeah.
So their oath held water.
Yeah. It does hold water. So Isaac has become Beersheba. My point is, these are other small wells that he's had that the Philistines didn't even need. They just filled them in. Beersheba is a major well, just like Gerar was. He's got a city. That's the point. He makes this oath, and now he has a city. And that city remained to the day of the writing of Genesis. So now Isaac is in the land. He's got a city. Abraham didn't have a city. He had some parcels of territory that he had purchased from the inhabitants of the land. But Isaac has just established a city and a treaty he's established. That's the point of the story. They are no longer aliens in the land. They are a city-state. Israel just became a city. I mean, Abraham's just became a city-state. He's only got one city, but that's how it worked. He'll have more. Yeah. So it's a pretty significant moment. And that's the point of the story. And just then we'll go back and we'll think through the implications of this thing, but just to give Esau his due. Next couple of verses, in case you're wondering what's going on with Esau. Esau's already 40 years old. And he marries two Hittites, Judith and Basmat probably. And they make life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. That's all we're going to get for Esau for a little bit. I mean, he's going to be back in the next story, but he marries Hittites. He does not marry Philistines. So he does not marry from the people that Isaac just made this treaty with. He marries from the people from the north. Remember, Abraham dealt with them when he bought the cave at Machpelah.
Yep.
Right. So I don't know why he marries Hittites. It's a very strange, interesting move. Does this mean Esau's not really hanging out with his father at this point, that he is spending his time further north? Probably, because the hill country is forested. He's a hunter. He seems to not like to stay around home. He doesn't seem interested in the family business, and now he's marrying women from up there. So I would say that this detail is meant to say that Esau, he's kind of on his own. He's headed up towards the Hittite region in the hill country, and Jacob's the one who's closer to home. So that sets us up for the next story. But anyway, we'll give Esau's due.
Means Jacob's 40 as well.
Yeah, because they're twins.
Yeah.
So he's been married about 3 years. Isaac was 37 when he got married, right? So they're technically older than Isaac was. Jacob's still not married.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's late marriages in this family.
Yeah. Even today, that would be late to be married.
Yeah. Yeah. Now they are going to live a long time, but we talked about that. But as we think about this establishment, because it's very important for Abraham to get a foothold in this land, this will be the claim that Abraham is of the land of Canaan. He has a city, and he has also a city deity. Now we know that the God of Abraham is the God of all nations, but it's important to have your tribal deity in this world and your tribal city. The Philistines have 5 of them. Isaac now has 1. That's very, very important. God has established him here. And he has established him so quickly that the native inhabitants are fearful. This is happening way faster than they thought it should. Right. And so they are already taking steps to make peaceful relationships with this new visitor. Mm-hmm. And there's some spiritual behind that as well. But it's certainly there is geopolitical.
Yep, definitely. And then on top of that, being the symbolism of life from the establishment of the well, that is a tremendous life source.
Yep.
So why they added the little section about Esau, I'm not sure at that point.
Yeah, I think it sets us up for this next story where Rebekah is going to conspire to make sure that Jacob gets the blessing and the birthright. There's a little added detail here. Jacob is the one who's staying close to home. This is an added detail to show just how far Esau is getting from where they are.
Yeah.
So whether Rebekah is operating out of the prophecy that she received when the 2 twins were in her womb, she might be, but she also could be making a very practical decision, and it might reveal that Isaac is quite impractical. Like, why in the world would you be wanting to bless and give the birthright to a child who is marrying Hittites and is spending his time up north when we've settled here and Jacob is here taking care of the sheep?
Right.
So I think that the writer of Genesis wants us to realize that Jacob is actually already living into the prophecy. Mm-hmm. And I think that'll take a little of the sting out of Rebekah feeling she has to finagle Isaac, because you can tell Esau doesn't want this. Mm-hmm. He's already discarded it. He sold the birthright earlier, and now he's hanging out, up north. It's kind of like you see this sometimes in families where for some reason the oldest is supposed to be the one who comes back home and works in the family business, but the oldest one has the absolute least interest in working in the family business. And he's out gallivanting and doing this and doing that. And you get the younger son who's out there slaving away, working his tail off and seems to really like it. But the father can't stop thinking about the eldest son who's supposed to come back, and he's just neglecting his younger one. You have a little bit of that going on already in the story. And I think that's why we're being told he's a hunter. He likes to go out, and now he's marrying people from north.
Yep. Not only 1, but 2. And makes it very clear that his parents aren't approving.
Yeah, Isaac, and no wonder. I mean, they're Hittite people, totally different culture, and they're not where they're settled. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it drives them crazy. Now, of course, they don't say anything to Esau. We find out later. Esau won't find out this bothers them for a long time. So when we get to that, we'll talk about family dynamics, huh?
That's right.
Yeah. So I want you to have a chance to kind of say the takeaway, but the thing that stands out to me in this story is this the way in which, now I know I don't want to be too harsh on the existing people in Canaan, but they are living in darkness. They are not being guided by the God of Abraham. The God of Abraham has already in Genesis 11 disowned the nations of the earth. He has relegated them to lesser members of his divine council to govern, and he has taken his special interest in Abraham. Now, that's not so clear in the Tower of Babel, but very clear in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 8 and 9. So we're reading that sort of back into the story, but it's there. And so God has taken special interest in Abraham, and he has declared that he is going to deliver all the nations on earth through Abraham. So Abraham is coming in to take over Canaan. And the existing inhabitants are beginning to get a feel of how much of a danger this really is. Who knows if they took Abraham as seriously as they're taking Isaac, but they take Isaac seriously. Abimelech knows they're in trouble. And I think that plays into this long story of Scripture, to this interaction between light and dark. And the way in which the darkness retreats from the light, it wants to make covenants with the light, but it wants to keep the light out of their territory. And I think this plays into Jesus' teaching about why the people, when Jesus, the true light of God, comes, the people in darkness hide from him, run from him, persecute him, and try and put him out. We see the same thing happening here with Isaac. We're going to see it throughout the history of Scripture with the people of God. And I think it begins here. So that stands out for me in this. And of course, I also have to remember God fulfills his promise to Abraham. For the first time they have a city in this land. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, very big.
So
very
what
big.
stands out for you? What do you, I know it's a very geopolitical section, but.
Yeah, I think you hammered that out pretty good, but I think it's a reoccurring issue of fear. And I think a fear is a very, very debilitating and crippling issue when it comes to self-survival. Our culture talks so much about survival.
Yeah.
Survival of the fittest is, this big thing, and as well as the fact that you do whatever you got to do at any cost to make it work.
Yeah.
And I think that it's obvious here that Isaac and Rebecca are having to learn a difficult lesson of the idea of deception, but also doing what God says. I mean, they didn't go to Egypt, so that appears like they did learn something.
Yep.
And God spoke to them and told them not to. I don't know that or recall whether or not Abraham was told not to.
No, I don't think he was. This was a new thing.
So I think that really would have made the story a little more interesting if he had gone to Egypt and did the same exact thing as Abraham did. And so I think maybe God is saving us from that because he had something bigger. Here, and maybe the very fact of the issue of the wells and dynamics and commitment and fear and trembling, because you don't really see that much more about Abraham when we're talking about Abimelech with the idea of them interacting later on as much. Yeah. But we're seeing a continuation of that promise to Abraham through Isaac,
right?
Realizing, and I think it's no mistake that it ends the chapter with the bitterness of Isaac and Rebecca over Esau's choices because it's a dead end.
Right.
That prospectus is bringing his line half of that multiplication of their descendants are gonna be a dead line. And I think a lot of times families experience that today, when they realize that their children aren't going to carry on the name, their own name, and that's a survival technique. That's what happened with the daughters of Lot. They wanted to preserve his name,
right?
And so that's a needing of surviving, the needing drives people to do things that hurt themselves often,
yeah,
or even others, and it's a tremendous error to fall into.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, it's natural though. I mean, it's natural to want to survive. It's natural to want to thrive. It's natural to protect yourself and to take reasonable measures to make sure you're not harmed or too vulnerable. Those are very human things. And yet they are the source of just about every conflict that has ever occurred in human history. And it is a way of life that Jesus seems to fundamentally reject as a way of saving us from it. So that you can't emphasize too much. There's a lot to think about there, and we can't hash it all out, but this is the place those kind of conversations begin. The other sin, other than just self-preservation, this kind of self-interest where I'm more important and mine are more important than anybody else, is also the idea of envy is here too. And we see this throughout the history. If Abimelech had thought, God is blessing Isaac, what if I converted to Isaac's God? And what if I invited him to come and be a prince among my people? What if I took that position of humility? You would have an entire different history if he did that. But they would never do that. Kings will never do that. Mm-hmm. Because we're not interested in what's best for my people. I'm interested in maintaining my power, right? So this idea of envy and covetousness and the desire to keep other people out so I can keep my power, no matter how blessed they might be, no matter how much God might be with them. Like I want him with me or he's with nobody. Mm-hmm. That kind of idea, it drives all these Middle Eastern politics in the scriptures. And you already see it here with Abimelech and Isaac. And the conflicts are going to become greater as the story goes on.
Yeah, and probably even into where we're at today, people maybe say, "Oh, we're not fighting over wells, or we're not talking," but believe me, people are wrestling over power and control.
Absolutely, resources, still resources.
Yeah, I mean, It doesn't change much other than whether or not who's our Lord, and Abimelech was able to tell who's Isaac. Who's God Isaac?
Yeah, he could see that he was being blessed, and it's difficult. Like here, we have a clear situation of a person who is not following God and a person who is, because God's not introduced himself too much to Abimelech, though he did talk to Abimelech, and Abimelech took his word very, very seriously, so seriously that he made a new law with respect to Isaac once he realized what was being done. So it's not as though Abimelech has just discarded God. He's willing to pay some homage, but one of the things we want to recognize is that the same envy that drives Abimelech drives him away from Isaac. The envy of Isaac's blessing. Same thing can happen to us in our lives, right? Like maybe we've got two people who are both Christians, and one Christian seems to have a better go of it than the other Christian. And the Christian who doesn't have as good a go of it can become envious, right? And begin to think, well, there's something wrong with this guy. Like that same kind of envy where somebody seems to be becoming popular, that's what happened with Isaac, drives them apart. It doesn't have to do that. That's my point. It doesn't have to. Abimelech could have become one of in the tents of Isaac. He could have. And we have one story in which a nation of Canaan does that. And it's way later when Joshua and the Israelites are coming in to conquer the land. The Gibeonites do it. Now they lie, but they're willing to become Israelites. They make a treaty, say, we want to be with you. We don't want to fight against you. Now, of course, God told the Israelites not to do that, but the Gibeonites deceived him, and the Gibeonites remained part of Israel through the entire history.
Right, near the woodcutters.
Yeah.
What I recall.
Yeah. Yeah, so there is a nation of Canaan that realizes, maybe if God is with this person, maybe we should join him. And they have a different history than Abimelech does. Because Abimelech's a Philistine, and we know how that goes.
Not pretty.
No, it's not pretty. Yeah. So, you're pointing out the fear and self-preservation. We're pointing out the way that darkness retreats from light. And we're pointing out the way that envy seems to limit the options to unhelpful options. There's always another option if you can forsake envy, If you can forsake envy and competition, there's another option that you're not even looking at because you're not considering it. And Abimelech never considers it, but there will be some who do. So these are the things I think that draw out of this, and we'll watch how they develop. And then, of course, Esau. Forsaking his birthright, despising his birthright in more ways than one.
His whole family, in some ways. I mean, gone somewhere else. I mean, if it seems like if Isaac was so prosperous, why would Esau go away?
Yeah, he likes to go out and hunt. He likes to follow the game. He likes the Hittite people up there in the hill country. He likes them. He marries 2 of their daughters. You know, so he's despising it. At this point, I guess I want to say we're going to get into this next week. We're going to get into this deception that Rebecca gets into. And you could be tempted to believe that that's the way it had to happen. But I'm saying it doesn't have to happen that way. It's so clear right now that the boys are already following what God said they were going to. Jacob is already around the tents. He's already carrying on the family business. He already shows a much greater interest in what God called Abraham and Isaac to do. And Esau seems to not care about it at all from the very beginning. So why do you have to lie to each other? That's what I'm going to say in the next one. Why do you have to lie to each other? It's already clear enough, their choices. But nobody will accept what God said, what's plainly obvious, and they keep fighting for a tradition that's clearly dead, and it's terrible. But anyway.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's setting the stage. Yeah. This chapter is setting the stage for all of that stuff. And I think there's probably more to that story that's personal to the reader than what's in the text.
Yeah. What do you mean?
Not yours. I'm just saying people in general, when they read it, they identify more with.
Yeah. You think with Esau or with Jacob?
Well, either or. Just he got the M&Ms and I didn't, kind of thing.
Yeah, and Esau wants the blessing, but it's weird that he does, because he's never there.
Right. Yeah,
and I think a story like this, I think all the patriarchal stories, I think they're preserved in this way because they are personal. I think you point out you make a good point. When you read it, you can't help but identify with one person or the other. And we're kind of trained as Christians to always identify with the hero. But that's not the best way to read these stories.
They're still trying to confusing who's the hero.
Yeah, well, at this point, there's no heroes, right? But yeah, I've been Abimelech. Have you been Abimelech? Have you ever been around someone whose star is rising and you realize that their increase is a bit of a threat and you're not sure if you should put them in their place or let them rise, and you're tempted to kind of make a little treaty? I've been in that position.
Yeah.
And I've been in the other position where the Lord seems to be blessing me and things are going a little well and somebody else not so well, and then there's conflict about that. I've been in both positions. I prefer to be in Isaac's position, but let's face it, many of us have been in the other. And the same thing with self-preservation. I've certainly made choices to survive that maybe sacrificed other people.
Yeah.
And so I understand what Isaac is doing. And you might say, I would never do that to my wife, but how many times have we sacrificed the people dearest to us to protect ourselves? We've done it. And sometimes we're the one sacrificed. So it's perfectly, this is what these stories are. You got to take them personally. You got to figure out where you are in the story. You just don't want to always cast yourself in the role of the hero. Mm. Because God might teach you something. If you realize you're Abimelech, well, now you can change direction. Mm-hmm. If you realize you're Isaac, maybe you can be sympathetic to Abimelech.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Isaac still has to figure out how he's going to be a blessing to those nations.
That's right. So, when you talk, we started this whole conversation out with imagination. You've got to imagine yourself into the story. Mm-hmm. And you've got to be honest if the Lord's going to really speak. Mm-hmm. But these are personal stories. And the reason they've lasted is because God's preserved them. But the reason God's preserved them is because they speak so universally to the events of our lives. And our individual lives, our corporate lives, community lives, national lives, they just have, these things play out over and over again. I mean, we could look in the news today and we would find Isaac and Abimelech a half a dozen times.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, we might actually find them right in our country. Two parties. Of course, each one disagrees which one God is with. But the rivalry and it's all there. It's still fighting over the wells.
That's right. Red and blue states.
Yeah, so I mean, these stories replay over and over again. And I think for those of us with eyes to see, we can learn some things by the mistakes of the past so that we don't repeat them in our present, and then learn some things from the successes. Thank you, Minister Joe.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us again. We'll be next week into a very familiar story for those who ever participated in Sunday school.
There you go.
You'll know this one. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.